There are 4.5 timeline lassos, each giving access to different functions. The first is the Move lasso, which is drawn top left to bottom right, started by clicking between the timeline resize and the track filters, and dragging towards the bottom right of the timeline. This lasso is segment and track filter aware, so as you drag further, more tracks and segments will be highlighted. Move allows segments to be dragged to a new position on the timeline, leaving a blank hole where the original clip was. Be aware that even if the insert button is on, the Move function will overwrite anything on the timeline. Copy will create a copy of the selected segments which can be dragged to another part of the timeline. It does not create a floating clip, which the blue copy used previously does. Slip modifies the original in and out points of the selection while maintaining the timeline in and out point positions and duration. Think of the selection being pushed back behind the rest of the timeline and the tails from the original footage being used to slip the in and out points behind the clips either side. This is good for pulling interview clips back into sync when it's been lost. Slide is the reverse of slip, which allows the selection to be dragged to another point in the timeline, maintaining the original in and out points but sliding them over the clips either side. Commit will create one video segment from multiple selected video segments. It does not apply to audio, which creates a mixdown on publish. Delete is the same as lift. It removes the selected footage from the timeline and leaves a blank hole. Clear will remove the highlighting. You can also click on the desktop or timeline to release the lasso. When using the lasso options, it's a good idea to click and drag on the pink menu boxes rather than the segments, as it's easy to deselect accidentally. If you want to select a single segment, double-click on the segment to also bring up the Move menu options. The second lasso is known as the blue lasso and is drawn from the bottom left of the timeline to the top right. This is the same menu that appears when marking in and out points, but is segment aware, providing a fast way of marking in and out points on multiple segments. The options work exactly as they do on floating clips. Lift removes the highlighted section from the timeline and places it in a floating clip, leaving a blank hole behind. Cut removes the highlighted section from the timeline and creates a floating clip, joining what remains on the timeline together. Copy creates a copy of the highlighted section and places it on the desktop as a floating clip. This is different to the copy described in the yellow lasso. Clear removes the in and out points created by the lasso. Next we have the zoom lasso, which is orange in colour and starts at the bottom right and goes to the top left. This is one of 3 ways to zoom in and out of the timeline and is particularly useful if you're using a pen and tablet. To zoom into a section, draw a lasso starting bottom right to top left around the area required. When you let go, the timeline will zoom into that section. The pink box on the bottom right of the timeline indicates when you're in zoom mode, and this can also be used to zoom in and out using the last parameters set. To zoom back out, draw the same shaped box but start and end under the timeline. A quick way to remember this is big box, little box. On the keyboard you can use page up and page down to zoom in and out. There's also a pale grey slide bar below the timeline, which you can click and push up to zoom in. This can then be used to scroll through the edit while zoomed in. The grey button under the track mute solo buttons above the zoom button is the centre playhead. This fixes the timeline cursor to the centre of the screen when zoomed in and moves the footage on the timeline past it, rather than the cursor disappearing off the edge of the screen. Other options for this button are available in the F1 menu under Editor. Lastly is the trim lasso, which is the lasso of 2 halves. This is another yellow lasso, drawn top right to bottom left, but highlighting a segment or highlighting an edit point will give you 2 different menus. If you select a segment, you will get a full screen version of the slip slide menu you see when using the options in the Move lasso. This gives you more control if you need to see the incoming or outgoing clips. To exit this menu, click anywhere on the blank section above the timeline or use the cross in the top right hand corner. If you draw the lasso over a single cut line, you get the trim menu. This is useful if you're trying to trim while using audio or video transitions, as both menus, if available on your software, will also appear here. Most of the time, trim is performed directly on the timeline rather than in this menu. Click on a blank section to return to the timeline. The timeline trim boxes appear at the top of the cursor line when the cursor is sat on an edit. Using the up and down arrows is a quick way to jump between edits. Clicking and dragging on the center trim box, which looks like a squared off S shape, will change both the out point of the clip on the left and the in point of the clip on the right equally, and will not take anything out of sync. It's also useful to extend video or audio at the end of an edit. The left trim box will change the out point of the outgoing clip. The right trim box will change the in point of the incoming clip. You can control which tracks are trimmed by using the track filter buttons, or by holding down Shift and clicking on the edits you want to trim simultaneously. Then use the trim box to move the selection. You will not be able to trim if you do not have tails available. These are shown on the timeline by a pale yellow squared off S shape at the top and bottom of each segment, mirroring the shape of the center trim box. On this segment you can see I have plenty of tails available, but on this segment you can see the limit of how far I can trim. To trim using the trim window, select the tracks to be trimmed using the track filters and lasso the edit top right to bottom left. The trim menu opens to show the last 2 frames of the outgoing clip and the first 2 frames of the incoming clip by default. Resizing the window on the right increases and decreases the number of frames displayed. Above this are numerical boxes with the amount of tails available, the position on the timeline, and by how much the edit has been moved once trimmed. The arrows in the center of the menu are center trim, the arrows to the right are right trim, and the arrows to the left are left trim. Keyboard shortcuts can also be used with any of the lasso modes to move backwards and forwards by either single frames using V and B, or by 10 frames using C and N.